And what we're talking about here, though, is effectively the impact of socioeconomics on an area. So socioeconomics is something that we talked about in the Where to Buy workshop for investors, right? Because socioeconomics are basically the combination of like financial,
education,
class.
income.
I don't want to use the word class, but
it's not. It's about educational standards, standard of employment, level of income, who owns their own home versus doesn't. It's a really interesting mix of those sorts of things. Who spends money in the local businesses, and is the local economy healthy? And this ultimately, kind of all comes into the amenity and overall desirability of the area. So I guess that's socioeconomics is actually the broader study of people in an area.
Yeah. And it is, go back to that desirability of people to A, move there, B, spend their money buying there. And we were talking about
long term, not just a little spike.
Exactly. Yeah.
We talk about the V's in growth. And if you have V's, it's not sustainable long-term growth. But if you have a bit more of a steady path of growth, it's because people want to be there and they keep pushing into the area consistently.
That's exactly right. So when the market slows down, because it will, I mean, it's not going to be on the rise forever. When it slows down, you want to be in an area where other people will still want to be there. All the other sort of, the iffy suburbs, they'll give those a wide berth. And then within those areas, of course, it's the type of property that you buy. But that's the topic for a whole other podcast episode. But what I find so much to share. What I find interesting is the amount of people that say, oh, I'm not going to buy in a good suburb because that's already had their growth. And I'm like, what? Did you think that was a one-off? And that is very much that short-term thinking that sort of applies that logic. And it seems really logical because they're trying to find a hot spot that's going to take off, right? And they go, well, I'll go back to Balmain only because that's obviously just, my neighbourhood. Balmain gentrified back in the sort of 80s and 90s, right? So people could argue, well, it took off then. But it's had huge, consistent, enormous growth ever since then. There's been ups and downs, as the market has gone sort of a bit up and down. We've had some real runs and then some slow patches. But over time, it's been extraordinarily good in terms of capital growth. And so to assume that just because they had its gentrification push, a few decades ago, that's it, just hang up its boots, it's never going to do well, it's sort of silly. Whereas what they're doing is betting on another area having just that one-off fast sprint. And we talk about this in the
Well, actually what they're betting on is that has the sprint, but then it maintains the longevity.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that's the risk is you can have the sprint, but if you have the sprint, you have to know when to time your exit.
Well, yes, because if you're looking at somewhere that's just got a one-off and then it doesn't have those fundamentals to sustain it, absolutely you've got to time your exit.
Because you've got to make sure you're not on the downhill run when the puff goes out of that market and everyone looks for the next big thing.